Following the recent 2-hour phone call between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, Russia announced a plan to build a tunnel linking Siberia to Alaska. It's being called the Putin-Trump Tunnel, a project that would connect Russia and America beneath the Bering Strait. But while Moscow is talking about tunnels and peace, Ukraine is asking the USA for Tomahawk missiles so that it can strike deep inside Russia. So what's really going on here? A new era of diplomacy or a distraction from a collapsing economy? Hi, welcome back to the channel. As you've just heard, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump recently had another 2-hour phone call. I'm not entirely sure what they're discussing for the whole of the 2 hours. We don't get a full transcript of that, but we did get some takeaways. Now, the takeaways were slightly different from both sides. In terms of the peace negotiations, Donald Trump's message was that he wants the war to end quickly. Vladimir Putin's message was that Russia is ready to talk security guarantees if the sanctions ease. So he's basically saying, pull back on the sanctions first, and then we'll think about some security guarantees. So I don't think that's the same as Donald Trump saying he wants the war to end quickly. It doesn't look like they're on the same page on that front. In terms of sanctions and trade, Vladimir Putin was pushing for a reopening of US-Russian relations. However, Donald Trump was saying that he wants to see some sort of peace before revisiting the sanctions themselves. Now, interestingly, there was this infrastructure idea. I've mentioned it briefly at the start of today's video, but Russia have suggested that a tunnel should be built under the ocean to connect Russia and the USA. So this is going to be a joint cooperation agreement, according to Russia. Well, from Donald Trump's point of view, he's expressed interest in great infrastructure ideas. So he didn't specifically commit to a tunnel between the USA and Russia. I think that would be quite a big commitment if he was to agree that, particularly whilst the war in Ukraine is going on. But Donald Trump does like infrastructure and big projects, so he didn't dismiss the idea completely. And there's a follow-up meeting that is now planned in Budapest in the next 2 weeks, which Donald Trump has potentially agreed to in principle. So he hasn't committed to actually going, but he said in principle he would be open to the suggestion. So I wanted to talk in a bit more detail about this tunnel, because it seems like a crazy, ludicrous, harebrained scheme that I can't actually believe that it's been tabled as a genuine suggestion, but it has. So let's have a look at the economics and how this tunnel compares to other tunnels in the world that have taken a very long time to build. So the Putin-Trump tunnel, as it's being referred to, was announced by Kirill Dmitriev, who's head of Russia's Sovereign Wealth Fund. Now, that's interesting because we've talked about the Sovereign Wealth Fund a lot, and that fund has been depleting significantly over the last 3 years or so because Russia has been using it to fund its deficits because it's spending more than it's earning. So it's interesting that he's proposing this because I presume there'd be a big budget put together and it would go into his wealth fund, but that's a separate issue. And the official goal of this tunnel is to connect continents and promote global trade. Now, I don't think it's proposed that there's going to be a lot of trade going through the tunnel, but maybe it is, maybe there isn't. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think the problem between the USA and Russia is because they're struggling to move things between the USA and Russia. It's not that it would help flow the traffic. It's because of the huge amounts of sanctions that are in place because of the war in Ukraine. That's what's stopping the trade between the two countries, not the fact that they don't have a tunnel to be able to send trains loaded with loads of goods backwards and forwards. And the strategic aim is to signal cooperation and shift the focus away from war to infrastructure. So basically to move the relationship away from the tensions at the moment into more of a cooperation agreement. But once again, the reason why there's tension is because of the war in Ukraine. It's not because the two countries haven't been getting on. It's much bigger than that. Now, Russia claims that this tunnel would open up a new northern trade route between Asia and North America, carrying freight, energy, and data cables under the Arctic. So that's what Russia wants to do. For Russia's Far East, it would be a lifeline idea, jobs, investments, and integration with Pacific trade. But how feasible is it to actually build this tunnel, even if the USA and Russia decided that they wanted to do it? Is it actually possible? Well, I thought it was worth having a look at the biggest tunnels in the world and how they compare to this proposal. So the proposed Putin-Trump tunnel would be around 70 miles long, and it would take somewhere in the region of 8 to 10 years to construct, and the cost of it would be somewhere around $100 billion. So this would be a massive project. It would actually be the world's longest undersea tunnel. And not just that, not just the fact that it's the longest, it would also need to go under the Arctic, which makes it even more challenging because you'd have to dig through lots of frozen subsoil and go underneath the frozen ocean. So I think from a civil engineering point of view, this would probably be the biggest challenge that most designers and engineers have ever faced. And just to compare that to the second biggest tunnel in the world, well, the actual biggest tunnel in the world at the moment, but it would be the second if the Putin-Trump tunnel was built, it's the Channel Tunnel, which joins the UK to France. And that's 31 miles long. So the new tunnel is more than double that length. Now, that was completed back in 1994. It took 6 years to build. And in today's value, it cost around $30 billion. So the Putin-Trump tunnel would be around 3 times more expensive and it would take longer. And that tunnel carries rail and freight and passengers. So basically, it's a combination of the trains that go through it. Some of them are carrying goods, some of them are carrying people. The Sikan tunnel in Japan doesn't go under the ocean, so that's why I've ranked it below the Channel Tunnel, because it's less comparable. It's actually a land-based tunnel, and it goes for 33 miles, was completed in 1988. It took 17 years to complete at a cost at the time of $7 billion, but that would be significantly more now, probably more like $40 billion. And it's the deepest rail tunnel in the world, and it's built through volcanic rock and has an undersea fault in some zones. And the other notable tunnel that I've included here is the Gotthard Base Tunnel, which goes through the Alps in Switzerland. It's 35 miles long. It was completed in 2016. It also took 17 years to complete and cost $12 billion. So the proposed tunnel between Russia and the USA would blow all of these other tunnels out of the water in terms of length and cost, and probably the length of time it would take to build it. So another interesting question is, who is going to pay for this tunnel if it was ever to be constructed? Well, Russia has said that it will seed funds, so it will put the initial amount of capital in, but it wants international investors and Western tech firms to join. And I think this is where it starts to get interesting, because if Russia was to sign agreements with international investors and Western technology firms, then obviously that would open up the availability of both investment into Russia from the West and also technology from the West going into Russia. And these are one of the key issues for the sanctions at the moment. Russia is currently spending more than it's earning, so at some point it's going to run out of cash and it will need to raise debt to start funding the difference that it's spent between the spending and earning. Now, at the moment, it wouldn't be able to access the West because it's locked out of the system. It's got the sanctions in place. If the USA signed up to this deal and then reopened the relationship between international investors and Russia, then Russia potentially then would be able to raise bonds, and it could do what it wanted with those money. It may invest into this tunnel, or it could use that money to carry on the war in Ukraine. So I think that's one of the angles that Russia is looking to develop. But technology has been one of the biggest problems for Russia over the past few years, because it's lost access to technology at the cutting edge of technology coming from the USA and other countries in the West. And by setting up this relationship and reopening those communications, it then potentially could access all of those chips and other things that it currently can't. So I think we can start seeing one of the reasons why Russia wants to talk about this tunnel. Now, Elon Musk was actually floated as a potential partner. He hasn't responded to this, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's the sort of project that would interest him, because he likes coming up with things that are challenging and groundbreaking, literally. So although he's not confirmed it, it wouldn't be a major surprise if he wanted to get involved in this. But looking at the economics of the situation, Russia currently has around about a $15 billion allocation to infrastructure projects in its budget. So having a project like this, which potentially is going to cost $100 billion over a 7-year period, 7 or 8 year period, it would need to be spending most of that infrastructure budget on this new tunnel. And it's spending around $140 billion on the war in Ukraine. So you can see that this tunnel is relatively small compared to the expense on the war. And this proposal looks like a bit of a deflection tactic. And one of the reasons for that is because Ukraine is pushing currently to get the USA to allow it to use Tomahawk cruise missiles. Now, these missiles would be a game changer from Ukraine's point of view, because a Tomahawk missile can travel over 1,000 miles and it is precision controlled. So you could strike lots of different refineries, air bases, logistics hubs in Russia. Now, Ukraine is already achieving those sort of distances with some of its drones, but a Tomahawk missile would cause significantly more damage than a drone that's flying 1,000 miles and maybe has 50 pounds of explosives in the nose. If you hit a refinery with a Tomahawk missile, that refinery is not going to open anytime soon. It would be taken out of action for a long period of time. So Ukraine wants to do this to really put the pressure on Russia and to ramp things up and cut off its revenue. Donald Trump is considering allowing that. And it's interesting that Russia have come up with this proposal where they're saying we want to strengthen the relationship between the USA and Russia and build a tunnel and make everything good at the same time as these missiles are on the agenda. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think the ongoing discussions between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are interesting, and Donald Trump, when he first took over back in January of 25, was hopeful that he could bring the war in Ukraine to a swift conclusion. He thought initially it was going to be one day. Then he was hoping that the meeting that they had in Alaska would bring some sort of settlement. Nothing tangible has happened so far because Russia isn't really playing ball. It's just ignoring Donald Trump's proposals. And as a result of that, Donald Trump has been considering allowing Ukraine to use Tomahawk missiles and also giving it more support. So that's obviously concerning from Russia's perspective, because prior to the latest discussions, Donald Trump was relatively ambivalent towards Ukraine. He wasn't really looking to help out significantly. But that seems to be changing due to the fact that Vladimir Putin isn't offering any sort of peace proposal. So Russia is now becoming concerned that Ukraine could be strengthened. It could get access to Tomahawk missiles, which could be devastating for the oil industry in Russia. We've talked about the drone attacks that have been taking place over the past few months, and they've caused major problems. There's been a reduction in the capacity from refining side of things, and also Russia has had to ban the export of gasoline and some diesel products. So it's already suffering to a certain extent. However, if Tomahawk missiles were to start hitting all of the refineries in Russia, they would actually close down, and Russia could see not just a loss of all of its export revenue, but also wouldn't be able to supply its home market. So that would be completely devastating and potentially would bring a swift conclusion to the war, but would leave Russia in a seriously difficult financial position. So President Putin has spoken to President Trump, and they've had this 2-hour conversation. Nothing was agreed in terms of the peace deal, but this proposal to build a tunnel between Russia and the USA was tabled. And since that meeting, it's then been fleshed out, and Russia have said, yes, we'd like to do this. It would be fantastic. It would build relations. It would help develop the area, bring lots of employment, and it's a great thing for everybody. So I wanted to go into a bit more detail in today's video to see whether or not it's feasible to build that tunnel. And what we've seen is that this tunnel would be by far the longest undersea tunnel ever constructed in the world, more than double the length of the Channel Tunnel between the UK and France. And that tunnel was very problematic to build. It took a long period of time. There were lots of issues in terms of how it was going to operate and how the border controls would operate and how you'd stop various things happening. And that tunnel was built between the UK and France, who are long-standing allies and were at the time members of the European Union. So they were on the same page. The tunnel between the USA and Russia is a completely different beast, because the USA and Russia have been long-standing enemies, basically, through the whole of the Cold War and then what's been happening in Ukraine. There's been tension between these two superpowers for a very long period of time. So agreeing a tunnel which would actually link the two countries, I think, is a huge question as to whether or not anybody would want that. If you held a referendum in the USA saying, is everybody on board to build a tunnel between Russia and the USA, I would doubt that the majority of people would vote yes for that. I can't really see the economic upside. There's no real benefit from the USA's perspective of building this tunnel, apart from maybe creating a few jobs whilst you're building the tunnel. But once it's in place, you've then got a direct link with a country that you've had a long-standing questionable relationship with. So I think from a civil engineering point of view, it would be very challenging. From a political point of view, it would be more challenging. And then, of course, you've got to find somebody to fund it. And then you need to put into place all of the trading relationships to support that tunnel to make sure that it was economically viable. And as it stands at the moment, the USA is actually leading the charge in the sanctions against Russia. So it's actually at the bottom of its list to start agreeing trading relationships and allowing Russia to have things like technology and money from the USA investors. So realistically, I don't see this tunnel ever happening. This is a flight of fancy. And I think what this is a sort of diversion tactic that Russia has thrown forward to take people away from the concept of not agreeing to a peace settlement. They're just simply not playing ball when it comes to sitting down and saying, okay, these are the conditions that we will stop this war. If all of these are met and satisfied, then we're happy to cease the war completely. That isn't happening. Russia isn't putting anything forward. We've got a stalemate. Nothing is happening in terms of stopping the killing and everything that's going on in Ukraine. So I don't think realistically Donald Trump is taking it seriously, but he's trying to promote the discussions. He's trying to get to a position where Russia does put forward some sort of plan, which then maybe could lead to some sort of peace settlement. But the overall summary of today's video is that the proposed tunnel between the USA and Russia, as a result of the 2-hour meeting that was held between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, I think is a complete non-starter. I don't think anybody's taking that seriously, but I wanted to flesh out some of the details in today's video just to talk about what it would look like, how much it would cost, who would be funding it, why anybody would want it to be in place. I don't really see that there's any strong justification for doing it. I don't think it will happen. And what we've just seen is probably another 2 hours wasted for everybody's time, that it didn't really go anywhere. That meeting, that conversation, we're no nearer to a peace settlement in Ukraine. And the longer that this war goes on, the worse it's going to be for Russia, because the Russian economy is really suffering at the moment. It's losing revenue from oil and gas. It's losing revenue from all of the sanctions. It's spending more than it's earning. It doesn't have enough money to keep funding the war. And at some point, the Russian funding will run out, and it's then going to need to start raising debt. And the big question is, who's going to provide it with that debt? Maybe China will help out, but China itself is also under the spotlight in terms of continuing its relationship with Russia. So that could damage Chinese business. And so there's a lot of things negative towards Russia at the moment. And all of this is pointing to the fact that the war in Ukraine is breaking the Russian economy. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, found it useful, informative, and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much to everyone that's supported me, either through Patreon or YouTube membership, or buy me a coffee, or YouTube super thanks, or buy me a coffee membership. Thank you so much, and here's something to put a smile on your face.
Nein. Vorher.